Welcome to the All of Life podcast from Redemption Church Tempe, where we have conversations on faith, culture, theology, and beyond to help us live all of life, all for Jesus. Let's jump into today's episode.
Welcome to the All of Life podcast, where we believe all of life is all for Jesus. My name is John Crawford, and I'm joined with my friends Jim Mullins and Will Vukurovich.
Hey, it's good to be here for this wonderful debate that's been a long time coming.
A long time coming. It's going to be good.
What are we talking about, John?
Yeah, today we are going to be talking about UFC, but specifically, how does UFC contribute to God's shalom, and does it? And you guys both land on different places, and we had a conversation 6 years ago when we were in Memphis at a diner for breakfast. And I've been waiting to sit down with you guys, waiting to hear you guys hash this out because we never finished the conversation. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say today.
We never finished that conversation in Memphis?
We never finished it. You guys...
The biscuits got to us? We got sleepy?
The biscuits got to you guys. You guys disagreed, but there was never any conclusion, follow-up, and so we're going to do it here today. We're going to let you guys decide who is the winner in this.
So, John, since you're the one who looks like, you look like Conor McGregor became vegan. For those who don't know what UFC is, what is it?
UFC is MMA, mixed martial arts. It is a really growing in popularity, especially with pay-per-view, but it's essentially a crazier version of boxing. We could describe it that way. And Will can correct me because Will's the MMA guy. So if I'm slaughtering this right now, correct me.
You actually have the background in mixed martial arts. How would you amend vegan McGregor's definition?
Yeah, it's a sanctioned sport. So I think from the outside, it looks like the crazier version of boxing, but it's really just being able to utilize your whole body, not just your fists in agreed upon competition. So elbows, knees, kicks, grappling, submission holds, all of them.
What does it stand for, UFC?
Ultimate Fighting Champion.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be fun. We've had some of these discussions before, and we always talk about how it'd be great if we could just turn on the mic. Yes. And because I feel like when we have debates, I feel like we can really debate stuff, but we generally disagree well. So...
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So I want to give you guys a few minutes to state your case on this, specifically whether UFC contributes to God's shalom or not.
Yeah. So each of us get a few minutes, and then we'll have time to ask questions and those sorts of things.
Totally.
All right. Who's going first, John?
Will, you're up, man.
Oh, he got you. You know what? Yeah. I don't feel like Will should have to. I feel like we should actually...
Flip a coin.
Flip a coin.
Does anyone have a coin?
Well,
yeah.
I don't know if I've had a coin for about 10 years. We'll do rock, scissors, paper for it.
Well, can you say that again?
Rock, scissors, paper.
I will do rock, paper, scissors with you.
You think that's the right way to say it?
Yeah, Will's going to win because he says it correctly.
No, that's our next debate. Ready?
Rock, paper, scissors.
Scissors.
Okay.
All right.
Will, you're up, man.
Do you choose?
No, I won, so he goes.
You defer?
Okay.
You defer the kick?
Yeah. Second half.
All right. So I'm going first. All right. Johnny, tell me when I got my time ready to go. All right. So I am making the argument that the UFC, while it does have many things that are good gifts of God embedded within it, ultimately does not contribute to shalom. And if we're defining shalom as the physical, social, spiritual flourishing that God intended for the world. By the way, I'm wanting my 3 minutes after I define that. That God intended for the world. Would you agree with that? That is a good definition to lay it out?
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to say that it does not contribute to shalom ultimately. Like in the sense that if it went away, shalom would actually increase. God's world would flourish more. And there are many directions I could go. I could go the love of neighbor. I could go eschatology and what it's going to look like in the new kingdom. But I really want to hone in on the image of God what it means to be created in the image of God. And I think UFC violates the image of God. And I'm going to root it in Genesis 9:6. So it's after the fall, after the flood, and it says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. And it's this it's this inherent call that violence, intentional violence towards another human being should not be done unless, of course, it has some sort of protective or justice measure to it. So in the text, it says if someone does commit some act of violence, that there may be a right role for violence to be done against them, leaving place for things like military and law enforcement and those sorts of things. But there's something inherent about the image of God that says you have to treat them in such a way that you don't do violence against them and to intentionally shed their blood through violence. So the image of God usually has there are three different ways to think about the image of God in Genesis 1 and 2, the substantive, the functional, and the relational. So each of those I'll take on with it. So substantive, that means there's something inherent about us, about human beings, that's distinct from the rest of creation, that demands a certain sort of respect and protection. And because we are created in God's image, we are to treat people and their bodies and their minds with a certain sort of respect that necessarily means that if you're punching them in a way that could cause a concussion or cutting off oxygen to their brain, that's not a way that you treat someone who's created in the image of God. Then there's the functional. It's the image of God is based on the particular vocation, the particular calling that human beings have to do things. So to have dominion. So in this, we see that humans are made to use their strength for fruitful work in the service of others. We are to have dominion over the whole of creation, but we are not to have dominion over other human beings. And what happens in UFC is for the entertainment of others, one human being is dominating another human being like they might do with an inanimate object that isn't the image of God, or treating them like an animal that isn't in the image of God. And then finally, relational. The image of God is, this aspect of the image of God is that the image of God is relational and that we bear the image of God together. That male and female bear the image of God, communities bear the image of God, and in our relationship together, we reflect ultimately what God is like. And therefore, I think the primary problem is that the violence that is had in UFC violates the image of God and the way that we treat each other because we're made in his image. So did I go like 3 minutes and a half?
Yeah, you went a little over, but we'll give you some grace here.
I think you give him 3.5 minutes.
Yeah, Will, you get an extra 30 seconds to follow up on this.
Yeah.
Man, state your case.
Yeah, so I actually agree with the premise of a lot of what you're saying, but not the way you're drawing out the logic of it.
Okay.
And so I think image bearing is foundational to this. Mm-hmm. In the UFC, well, first let me start with this. One of the main distinctions I think that a lot of people get caught up in on this argument is from an outside observer, just kind of first glance at UFC on a commercial or something, it looks like unrestrained violence. Mm-hmm. And so when that's the lens through which you're viewing this, that shapes how you understand it. But to understand like any professional sport, this isn't just like a dude who likes to punch people is competing at this level. This is an elite athlete who's devoted his life or her life to training in a sanctioned sport where there's weight classes to ensure as evenly matched opponents as possible. There's win-loss records. There's all of these things to level the playing field as much as possible. who then agree to enter into a competition where there are established rules and parameters and restraint. So you can't gouge eyes, you can't kick in the groin, you can't, there are established things that you can and cannot do. It's not just this wild berserk kind of flailing around. There's a lot of restraint in if an opponent's hand is on the mat, you can't knee or kick to the head. You have to be aware of where their body is. You have to be aware of positioning, all of these things. So the level of skill, not only to perform what you intend to perform, but also be aware of your opponent's body position requires restraint in order to successfully compete in a match and not get disqualified. Additionally, I think a lot of the comparisons are unfair when people will equate it to dog fighting. It's like human cockfighting. It's like gladiators in a coliseum. The main difference with those is agency. An animal doesn't have a choice if it's put in one of these fighting scenarios. A slave doesn't have a choice if it's thrown in the middle of the Colosseum, right? The slave has to compete. Here are two people who have consented to engage in this. Thinking through, you brought up concussions, injuries, those types of things. Those are valid. But like any profession, there are occupational hazards that you understand, whether you're going to have a job at a computer where you're typing and you can develop carpal tunnel syndrome, or, MMA is just one of the many sports where concussions are a concern. Yeah, it's interesting. There was a study that actually shows there's slightly fewer concussions than in football. And I don't know that football should be our standard, but it's not as concussive as a lot of casual viewers may think. And then, I think the main difference, even in the Genesis passage that you're bringing up, is this idea of violence. There is a sense that we're doing that violence is occurring, but I don't know if it's not. I would argue it's not the same intent as in Genesis when we're talking about stewarding strength and power in order to harm somebody who doesn't have a choice in that. Right? It's not like I got, drunk at a bar and angry and I'm going to go fight someone. They don't really even may not want to fight me. They may be self-defending, whatever. Here, there is agency, there's responsibility, there's choice to actively engage in this competition. It's a competition that is more, I'm getting the time sign. So
Finish up.
No, I think it's there's a lot of physicality in the competition. But I guess you could call that violence, but it's not violence in the sense of malicious intent, or doing to somebody who is powerless or not expecting, not prepared.
All right, so man, that's good, Will. I got a question. So words.
Hey, don't we get our questions?
I can't wait for my question, dude.
I want you to respond to this and hear your thoughts on this.
So you're breaking the terms of our contract. All right, that works. Go ahead.
You said the word agency, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It seems like that's a key area that Will highlighted that you guys differ on.
Were you going to give us our opportunity to ask questions, or go straight into the interview? Because if that kind of messes with my questions a little bit.
Okay.
So can I go with my questions?
Go for it.
No. Mess with his questions.
Yeah, because what we agreed on was that I'd be able to ask Will some questions afterwards.
Totally.
And so the two questions, right? Is that what we get?
Yeah,
All
two
right.
questions.
So you emphasized agency, responsibility, and choice, and the physical nature of it, right? So hypothetically, if there was a sport that was, let's just say the Olympics added pornography to the as an Olympic event, would that be okay? Because there is agency. There's consent, there's, responsibility for one another, and there's choice, and it's a physical thing. My question is, would that be a valid sport? And if so, how is it different?
You asked me about Olympic pornography.
Olympic pornography, bro. According to your criteria,
No, I hear you.
it's a valid moral sport.
So I think the nature, not that I've done extensive research into pornography, but my response would be the nature of pornography, the goal of it is to elicit a response in its viewers. That is the primary driving goal.
Okay.
That response from a Christian perspective, we would say would be lust. And as Christians, we're commanded not to do that.
Yeah.
I don't think the primary goal of the UFC is to elicit a sinful response in its viewers.
Okay.
So I don't, you hear the argument of like some people would watch it and they get pumped up and, they want to like try these. That may be a secondary outcome, an unintended consequence, but I don't know that that's the driving factor like it would be in pornography.
Okay. We'll circle back around to that one.
right.
That'll be good. My second question for you is, can you love your neighbor and actively try to cut off oxygen to their brain?
Like 100% yes. 100% yes.
Would you, loving your neighbor as yourself, would you like to have the oxygen cut off from your brain?
If I am competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I desire to get better, then I want my neighbor to push my development. Now, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in the UFC even, what you see is before oxygen is cut off to the brain where you pass out, you tap out and the person lets go immediately. So it's not doing long-term damage. You're not prolonging, the deprivation of oxygen to the brain. You can feel it as it starts to go. And when it's in, you're either going to go to sleep or you're going to tap out. Those are the choices. And 99% of the time, guys are going to tap out. If not, then, you got to, there's questions about the training and they're thought for long term. But the vast majority of the time, it ends before it's detrimental.
So would you say the same thing if it was referring to a punch that was intended to knock someone out, which could do permanent brain damage?
Would I say that I can do that while loving my neighbor?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, that's getting back to the understanding the occupational hazards. And I think that's the most significant one with the UFC, with a lot of contact sports, not simply combat sports, but contact sports, that there is that reality. There's also, there's different angles to take it. Again, if we're talking about training, then yes, I want to be pushed. Similarly, right? Our viewers may not know this. Every Monday morning or Monday afternoon, a group of us who preach regularly, we meet, we talk, we critique the person's sermon, not because we enjoy tearing each other down, but because we all want to get better. And so if you guys are holding back in that, that's actually a detriment to my growth. So if we're, grappling and I'm trying to cut off oxygen to your brain or we're sparring and I'm, trying to improve your punch defense, me holding back too much, there's an appropriate amount, but too much is actually detrimental to your growth. So it's loving for me to push you in that if that's an agreed upon goal that we both have.
If the agreed upon goal was to throw a javelin through our heart, does it make it okay?
Well, there's a different outcome with that, right? We're not talking about immediate death.
Immediate death versus like potential long-term death and brain damage. That's the line.
Right, but then we can also say,
when it happens.
Can I serve you a bowl of ice cream knowing that could be potentially harmful over the long haul to your death?
Hey, no, that's fair. That's fair. Hey, and as a guy who eats too much ice cream, I think that's fair.
Okay.
But there's not if it's not to say that if one thing, all that puts into question is ice cream. That doesn't make concussing somebody moral. It just says, is ice cream. Okay, those were some of my questions.
Okay.
Yeah, well, what do you got for Jim?
You used the phrase, beat someone like you would treat an animal? How are you treating animals, my friend?
That's a good point. No, that's a slip of the tongue. Yeah,
yeah, Jim's got a new hobby of grilling meat,
Yeah. That's a good point. That was a slip of the tongue. But what I was trying to drive at is that there is a certain way that when we're called to have dominion over creation, that there's a certain authority and rule and even physical role that humans play within the creation that you can have over another animal to essentially dominate them for the flourishing of the world, for their flourishing, so on and so forth. But there is a distinction between an animal and a human being. And that's what I'm trying to draw out, is that that the use of violent force that you might use on a tree to cut it down, which is the proper use of strength, should not be used in a human being to take an axe to their knees, right? Like there's
like a kick to the knees.
No, I mean, I'm in the most drastic sense.
Sure.
The violence that you could do to a tree to like create wood and make a guitar and build a house, you treat a person differently than you treat a tree. And if you did that same action to a person, then that is violence, that is sinful, and it's because that person is made in the image of God. You treat them differently than you treat the rest of the non-human creation. But there's a distinct dignity and value that humans have that like Genesis says, would say that you should not create, you should not do violence.
Yes, I still think that gets back to intent.
Okay.
Because
sure.
I shouldn't use violent force against you out of a sinful, angry motivation.
Yeah.
If you collapse,
yeah,
and I'm performing CPR, the act of chest compressions is violent.
Yeah.
When done properly, it typically breaks ribs.
Yeah.
So I don't think I don't think it's merely the force or the action. A doctor slices your body open.
Sure.
That could be considered very violent.
Sure.
But the intent is radically different than, I don't know, like the serial killer or the mugger who's trying to steal your purse, right?
Sure.
So I think intent matters in this. And I think because it's an agreed upon, like I keep going back to this, it's agreed upon, there's a set of rules and expectations. That intent is different. You see this immediately as soon as the fight's over. In the vast majority of matches, guys, the first thing they do is hug each other.
Same thing with pornography, though. They hug each other after they do that. Like, that doesn't instantly make it better.
I don't know that they do that.
Conceivably.
Right.
They're actually hugging each other throughout the whole thing. Does that make it better?
Hey, I addressed the Olympic pornography point.
Okay, so you're getting into making a point.
I think the point is there is a desire to compete well.
Yeah.
And there is a desire to use training, skill, and athleticism to defeat your opponent.
Yeah.
But I would argue against the idea that there's we just want to cause violence and harm to one another. As soon as matches are over, you see guys inviting, man, come train with me. Mm-hmm. Come see how I learn to do what I do. Come learn all of my secret moves and setups and all of this. There's a camaraderie there that would suggest it's not this violent, my only goal in life is to bludgeon a fellow human, but actually to compete well.
Sure. But there's are we still doing the question thing, or are we just jumping into it?
Keep going.
So you said that the goal is to compete well. You can compete well in a lot of things. But would you say that because it is competition, it is necessarily good? Competition makes it moral?
No.
Okay, so if there was a sport where kids were trying to kill each other with a sword fight to the death, does that make it? Was that moral? Does that contribute to shalom?
No.
So where do you draw the line on the certain degree of violence? Is it that it's instantly killing them, or that it's slowly breaking down their brain and causing them to have brain damage that eventually is going to, over time, ruin their family and then they die? So
But
is it the instant?
No.
Or-
But your premise is that everyone who competes in the UFC will have long-term chronic concussive issues.
Well, so you I think made a fair point on the occupational hazard. And I think there's a difference between occupational hazard and the occupational purpose, the telos. And that like if you're building, if you're in construction, there's an occupational hazard of you falling off of a high building, right? That is an occupational hazard. But if you were competing in a sport where you just jumped off of 3-story buildings and saw what happened, that would be a bad sport because you would break your legs, because the purpose of it is actually to knock somebody out. Like, it's even different from most sports because the purpose of it is to do a degree of violence that would allow you to win, that harms and tarnishes someone who's created in God's image. So I think there's a difference between the purpose of something and a potential hazard. So in the sword fighting scenario, I would say that's the difference between fencing, which seems like a legitimate sport, and having children sword fight to the death.
Okay.
Right? The purpose, the telos of it, not just the occupational hazard.
So you're saying intrinsically in the striking element of MMA,
Yeah.
because one of the ways that you can win is a knockout,
Okay. Yeah.
that it is intrinsically sinful, not contributing to the shalom because of one of the aspects.
Well, I would say, can we agree that it's not just the kind of like peripheral aspect of it? That it's
It's one of the avenues.
It's one of the central
ways. Okay.
ways. Would you agree to that?
That you can win.
Yeah.
Sure.
What are the other ways?
Submission,
Okay.
points.
Just think about the word in and of itself. Well, okay, submission.
What are you saying? Submission is a bad word, Jim?
It sounds a lot like dominion to me.
Some New Testament passages you're going to have to grapple with, my friend.
Submission through violence versus submission versus
You
self-giving
didn't
love.
say any of that. You just said the word.
Let me clarify.
Okay, there you go.
I think willful submission in response to self-giving love is very biblical.
Yes.
So submission, knockout. What's the other one?
Judge's
Points?
decision, points.
Points. Yeah. So if you were able to change the sport to where it was a sport that was played, that was done by points, and the most detrimental aspects of damaging someone created in God's image were taken away, I'd be all for it. But it would be like, just think of it if you were to create, if football, or no, let's say basketball, suddenly you have a gun on your waist that you can shoot somebody, go to a layup. I would make the same argument that basketball is a sport that diminishes shalom, but all you would have to do is take away that, and then I think you have something. Because where do you draw the line?
Yeah. Well, I think there is a difference in children intentionally trying to murder one another with swords.
Yeah.
And understanding that a percentage of people who participate in this sport may at some point have some long-term detrimental consequences.
Yeah. Do you think that's a little bit of a lightly stated statement? Like, if you were intending to give someone a concussion, if the goal was to give someone a concussion, your primary strategy would be able to strike them in the head. Like, that's the way it happens, right?
Sure.
And that's one of the main parts of the sport. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it's a part of the sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's probably one of the main.
Mm-hmm.
But not everyone who gets knocked out is necessarily going to have these horrific long-term effects. I feel like you're taking like a subset and making it the whole. And because of that subset, then the entire sport is negated.
Sure. Now,
the most common injury in MMA are injuries to the arms.
Sure.
Number 2 is injuries to the neck.
Okay.
Number 3 is injuries to the head, which includes cuts, bruises, black eyes, teeth, all of these other things.
Sure.
Concussions would be included in that, but not solely concussions are number 3.
So let's take it into this basketball with a gun scenario. If you're only allowed to use the bullet once a game, then the majority of the injuries would be twisted ankles and, these sorts of things. But there would be a lot of gunshot wounds that would occur, and then would make that sport unnecessarily violent to the degree that it diminished shalom and either needed to be changed or stepped away from. In the historic tradition of Christians in the early church deciding not to engage in theater, because theater at the time actually had people, often slaves, having sex live or doing acts of violence live. And they said, there is something to that is just not right, that we must step away from. And, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't good acting and that drama and acting and those things are wrong. It's just saying that the presence of that detrimental, damaging thing says, I don't think we should be a part of it. Especially the act of watching. See, because I would say martial arts, those sorts of things. I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but there are a lot of martial arts that what they're actually doing is displaying very important aspects of God, have a degree of defensiveness, protectiveness that demonstrates strength, demonstrates God's creativity, the way that he's made the body, those sorts of things. And that is a good thing. But I think when you turn it into this thing where you gather around to watch people get beat up and have violence done to them, and that the point of it, like one of the main ways you win, is damaging the brain of another image bearer, I think that's when you step away. So I'm not criticizing participation in martial arts. It's more of the being a fan of people who are doing violence to each other for money.
To the surprise of many, honor and shame are significant themes in Scripture, especially within the writings of the Apostle Paul. For our February 1st Wednesday, author Jackson Wu will draw upon his experience living in China and his work as a theologian to help us understand honor and shame and the role they play in cultural discourse, community life, and character formation. Join us for First Wednesday on February 3rd at 6:30 p.m. in the Redemption Tempe Sanctuary. See you there.
So a couple things come to mind.
Yeah.
If God's attributes can be demonstrated in martial arts.
Sure.
And the history, the birth of mixed martial arts is having different martial arts compete against one another to see which is best, then that would suggest that you can see those same things in MMA. It's just kind of the culmination, what's best of each of these combined for an outcome. With the viewing, I think that's a difficult... I think that there are people who watch a UFC event and, they're going to get hyped up. They want to see the big knockout. They want to see the blood, that sort of thing.
Sure.
You have to concede that point.
Yeah.
But I will say the more I've trained and you watch it with different eyes. So if we watch a basketball game,
sure,
dude, I played basketball in 6th grade. That was it.
Yeah.
I rarely watch basketball except for the finals.
Yeah.
Because of your familiarity with it, you're watching a different game than I am. I'm like, is the ball in the hoop or not? Like, that's all I know. right?
Yeah.
When I watch UFC and I can say, this dude's going to throw a spinning back kick because of how his feet are right now. I'm watching not because I want to see somebody get bloody or somebody get knocked out. I'm watching because I'm seeing something that I'm practicing being executed at the highest level. And so I think it's unfair to, like, for some people, yeah, but I think about it when any of us preach a sermon, some people are hearing things that we're not saying or walking away with things we didn't intend or that wasn't our point. We get those emails every Monday morning. But I don't know that we can say everyone watches with this kind of bloodthirsty mob mentality.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I think it's conceivable that you could watch it for the technical beauty of it, especially those who are involved in martial arts, right? But if we were watching bullet basketball, I could genuinely be watching the game for all the other aspects, the alley-oops, the three-pointers, those sorts of things. But because there is the presence of some of those good things, it doesn't negate the fact that people are getting shot once a game on the basketball, right? Furthermore.
Okay.
By the way, we're gonna have to put some
parental
advisory on this. Furthermore, if someone said that they watched pornography because of the technique and the skill that was being displayed on there, like the human ability for one's body to work a certain way, it's legitimately a good gift of God. Sex is a good gift, but it's a good gift that's being distorted and it's in the wrong place. Like if someone was watching pornography for those reasons, for the cinematic excellence, do you think that's valid?
No, and I feel like I've addressed that 3 times now because you keep going back to the porn argument.
But I don't think you have. How have you addressed it?
When you initially brought it up with Porn Olympics, I think the intention of porn is to elicit a sexual response in its view.
Yeah.
The intention of UFC is to compete in mixed martial arts at the highest level. There's a fundamental difference.
Well, you went to the intention of the participants versus the viewers. I think the viewers, I think the majority of the viewers, if we're being honest, they want to see 2 people do violence against each other. Here's the thing. I like MMA. I like UFC. I like it, but I don't like why I like it. Because there's a part of me that it taps into old sinful attitudes I have of violence. I mean, here's the thing, the reason why people don't watch boxing with headgear on as much as they do UFC, and that's taken the popularity, is because the presence of more violence. If it was just technical, dancing around, let's tap each other and score the points, it wouldn't draw the millions of dollars in.
Sure. I think that's a fair point.
Fun.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that's difficult, and you've alluded to this, like martial arts contributes to the shalom.
Yeah.
And I know we're talking about UFC.
Yeah.
But we see martial art, we see what it does. I've seen what it does for my kids. I've seen what it does for me and my health. I've seen the community around the sport that's developed at the martial arts studio. I'd like to plug Fluid Martial Arts on McClintock.
Yeah.
But here is the reality. You know why those places are so successful right now?
Why?
Because of the...
Okay.
You know why so many kids are participating now? There was a big boom when Karate Kid came out. There was another boom when Ninja Turtles came out, and then there was a huge boom when the UFC started to gain traction. So you see people watching it and not necessarily just getting bloodthirsty and tapping into all of that, but going out and starting to engage in something where they're learning of really a skill. It's contributing to their overall health, well-being, lots of these things.
All right. So if it is contributing to your health, why does the American Medical Association and the British Medical Association say that it should be banned, that it is a inherently unhealthy sport? to participate in. UFC, not martial arts.
Haters gonna hate.
Haters gonna hate.
I'm just kidding. I think they make those recommendations about some other sports as well.
And the other thing would be, the question I have is, just because some good is accomplished from it doesn't necessarily mean the end justifies the means. I mean, we could think of many examples. Like, we, as a church, we could easily grow our church. All you have to do is go up on Sunday morning and say some crazy controversial statement, and everyone's going to kind of flock to you, or give away a car or something like that. Like, churches, just because people are coming to church, that doesn't mean that the ends justify the means. We could do a UFC fight on the stage. Tons of people would come.
Between you two.
Between us two. So what would you say about that? Like, at what point does the end result, is it a positive occurrence that happens from a negative thing, or does it actually make that thing good? Does the end justify the means? Wait, what's up, John?
Keep going. This is your last question.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah, so I think when we think about really the heart of what you're arguing is because of concussions.
Sure.
And so when you look at the number of participants who are engaging, for physical health to learn, these types of things at kind of the local level, those people are receiving tons of health benefits. It's going to be such a small subset of those people who would even compete in a full contact, local tournament.
Yeah. And I'm good with all that. That's great.
And most of those people will never even make it to kind of like a regional, right? So we're talking about such a small, as far as the concussive at the UFC level, that's such a small subset of the people who are engaging in that. I think that the ends do justify the means. I think that they're agreeing to this. There's restraint, there's agency in it. And I think that for that subset, I think at best, when we think about this through the biblical, I think at best, it's a meat sacrifice to. I think for some people, their conscience doesn't allow it, and there's no judgment. But I don't know that it rises to the level of across the board, this is sinful.
Okay, I have got plenty of other questions, but John put me on a cap.
Well, we're approaching time, and so I want to give you guys each.
We're going over time, but go ahead.
Yeah. I want to give you guys each final moments here to. If you guys got one more question, kind of wrap up your guys.
I think we keep it going a little bit.
All right, keep it going. Go ahead.
You got more material.
Yeah. Jim's got more in there, man.
Because I feel like we're just getting into it.
Yeah. All right. Keep it going.
I think at this point, we should let people know what's at stake here. So first of all, I think our backgrounds affect this conversation.
Yeah.
So you got to give your background a little.
Yeah. Especially because you threw out the shout out to the studio.
Yeah,
so,
there you go.
Yeah, where are you coming from in this conversation?
So it really started after college. There was a local police activities league in my hometown that had a boxing program. And I started boxing because, honestly, my dad and I loved to watch Rocky when I was growing up. And so I thought it would be cool and got into a great health benefits, never competed or anything like that. A few years later, there was a group of really close Christian friends, and one of the guys, for whatever reason, his dream was to compete in a local MMA fight. And so we had a guy who wrestled in college. We had a guy who did Jeet Kune Do, which was Bruce Lee's martial art, one of the first mixed martial arts. I kind of brought some boxing expertise, and we all trained together. And it was, honestly, it was some of the most fun. There was a jiu-jitsu guy too. We're teaching each other, learning from each other, pushing each other, encouraging each other. And I actually got to corner the guy for his first fight. It was a ton of fun. And then,
what do you mean corner him?
So when he competed, you have guys in the corner. Yeah, sorry, I should explain that.
Yeah.
That are kind of coaching, looking out if he gets in trouble. You can.
Got it.
So yeah, I got to do that. And then
So you're like the old guy in Rocky, like
Mick.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Slip the jab, Rock.
Yeah.
And then when Erin and I actually moved to Arizona, when she was pregnant, we were, not making a lot of money. So for a side job, I worked at a boxing gym, Scottsdale, to make some extra cash, helping to train folks. And then recently, in about the last year and a half, my boys got involved in martial. Honestly, being able to see what it's done for especially for my oldest, self-confidence and, just a place where G out, especially with those other options have been reduced. It's been incredible. And in the community there, folks from wildly different backgrounds, being able to come together, share this common experience, push each other, encourage each other. And yeah, it's been great. It's been a ton of fun getting to know that crew and, celebrating events with them and being a part of that community. Really, really.
Yeah, that's cool.
How about you, Jim?
I have no formal training. So you come with a degree of experience that I don't have. And I do think when you're talking about the meat sacrifice to idols, the conscience thing, that is a factor with me. I think that's a thing because of the fact that I grew up and I got in a lot of fights and I did really glorify violence. And I enjoyed the act of doing violence and watching violence. And as a believer, when I do watch these things, I think it does stir up some things in me that possibly because of your involvement in it, it wouldn't with you. So that's my background. I do wonder, though, would you say that there are probably more people like me than there are when it comes to UFC viewership? People who want to see violence versus truly understanding the technical craft.
I don't know. I don't know how to get, I think we both would have different flinches. I don't know how you measure the actual data, because when I think about the folks that I know who are willing to pay, let's be honest, UFC is expensive to get on pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Who are willing to fork out the money. It's the people that have a vested interest. It's cheaper to rent an action flick than, this kind of deal. But it could be.
Yeah.
I don't know how we could. Yeah.
John, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that even if I'm speaking from my own experience from it, I used to watch it quite a bit, and a lot of it was the violence component, and I would say from the handful of folks that I know, it is there is something. It stimulates a desire to see violence, and that's where I would say even different from watching, an action flick that's violence is this is real time, not acting. And I do think that there's something to what that does to stimulate a desire to see violence. Yeah.
My other question, you're giving us final questions that we can ask each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
Cool. We'll take turns. How many do you want to do? I got a dozen. Do you want me to keep going? Or?
No, I don't have a question, but can I raise another point?
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things that's really interesting that happened, even in the short time that I've been training at Fluid, is you see folks come in kind of from what you're describing.
Yeah.
Maybe rougher upbringing, maybe, have some violence in the past, those sorts of things. What really helps those guys is training.
Yeah.
That those impulses are allowed to be expressed in a totally safe environment where they're not causing physical harm.
Yeah.
They start to build their level of proficiency.
Yeah.
And what happens, and I'm not trying to say this for you, but for a lot of guys, the reason those things are happening is they have a chip on their shoulder. They have the insecurity, all of these things. They got to prove something. Well, you start training and you realize you don't really have to prove anything. A lot of those kind of inner turmoil things that are driving some of those behaviors are actually met in a really, really healthy way. So there's not the, walking, like I remember in high school, you walk in the room, you size everyone up, the pecking order and all that.
Yeah.
You don't have that because you don't need, not like, oh, you're the best, but it's just like, that's, that box has been checked every morning when you're in the gym or every evening, and so you don't feel the need to prove it. Some of the nicest guys I know are the ones that I'm like, even with the little bit that I've trained, I'm like, I'm scared of you. Like, you could crush me. You know what I mean? But that's just not in them because of the training, because of what that kind of cultivates in you. So I think for like some folks that are like, oh man, I watch this and I'm getting fired up and getting pumped up. I think actually participating would decrease that rather than increase that.
I could see that initially, but especially when it comes down to a local martial arts sort of thing. But when it comes to the nature of competition that's trying to knock people out and give them concussions and break arms, right? I think that there is something that's related to the moral formation of persons, that our practices and our habits actually shape who we are. And if we are engaged in acts of violence every day that's trying to break arms, that's trying to punch people, I think that can actually cultivate a violent posture toward the world, to where I do think that there have been some things that have shown that people who are in the UFC, people who are in the NFL, who are doing this perpetual violence, do actually have a higher chance of domestic violence, of getting in fights in bars, these sorts of things, and do a lot more damage. But there's a comedian who talks about how, he talks about how football, we'll just use it with football. You know who I'm talking about?
Go ahead.
I'm not going to say the name of the comedian, but the comedian is saying, like, we give these football players a hard time because they're always doing like acts of violence and those sorts of things out in the world. But all they're doing is football, just not on a football field.
Yeah.
But they spend their entire life violence, and then you step into an elevator with your girlfriend, and then that you cultivating that trigger, that rage, that ability to attack another human being goes off. It's a spiritual discipline that's forming the soul in a way that's shaped around violence.
Yeah, we see way more instances of that in the NFL than in the UFC.
Sure, and in the NFL, we can throw that on the table too.
Yeah, but I would say,
I like it more. So
right, but across all players, present and past in the NFL, I don't know. I don't have the data if the majority of participants are engaging in. I think you're 100% right. There's two incidents that come to mind of domestic violence of a UFC fighter, and it's brutal. So you're right. Like, the level of severity when that goes wrong is going to go very wrong. But if we're looking at like actual numbers of folks who are engaging in this compared to, the number of folks who are misusing it in that way, well, that's what's going to get all the national attention. That's what, right? MMA player, fighter beat up his girlfriend, right? It's feeding this national narrative of it's human dogfights. It's like the call, it's all of these things. There's no news story in MMA player is kind, fighter is kind to his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't think our attention is drawn to that, but I hear what you're saying.
So another question would be, where would you draw the line? What would have to happen? What degree of violence would have to happen in the UFC for you to say that the violence inherent in the sport diminishes shalom and harms people who are created in God's image and therefore is invalid? Like, what's the line? Like, if they brought knives in?
Yeah, weapons for sure.
But
I would say,
why weapons? Like, someone's hands, like Conor McGregor's hands are more deadly than me with a knife.
But Conor McGregor's not fighting you. Conor McGregor is fighting someone at his level who is as deadly with his hands.
So what? So why does that make it better?
because there's a level of equity in that. I think when there's weapons and there's intrinsic, intentional long-term harm.
Yeah.
I think, so I would draw the line at weapons. I would draw the line at no weight classes because there's inherent disadvantage.
Yeah.
I would draw the line, and this is a real world example, in transgender fighters, because there is an inherent inequity in that. And you see that with this, there's a man who identifies as a woman who has done significant damage to female competitors. And then the other thing I would say is if there were no rules, if it was just a free for all, which it's, clearly not, that kind of wild, unrestrained, anything goes, that's no longer competition. And that's tapping more in survival.
Yeah.
And that kind of root violent fight or flight sort of deal, rather than, no, this is a controlled, strained environment where we're competing in the.
Okay. So with the framework you've said there, eye gouging is included. You can gouge people's eyes out, and that's fine.
No.
Why? Well, no. Within your framework, you said that's not a line that you're willing to cross. That's not a line too far. Gouging someone's eyes.
Okay, I don't think I said that. What I said was if there were no rules.
No.
Right now, the rule says you cannot eye gouge. So if eye gouges were allowed, are you asking me to name the specific things?
What I'm saying is, you said no rules, but I'm saying what rules, where do you draw the line on the rules that makes it where it's too far for you?
Yeah, I think eye gouge, you have immediate, long-term consequence.
Okay.
So I would say that's too far. Eye gouge would be too far.
So
striking to the back of the head.
So
because that
cumulative long-term consequence is fine. It's just the immediacy of it is the problem.
Yes, the potential that for some people, the cumulative effect is detrimental. I would consider as an occupational hazard because it's not yet been proven that everyone who engages in this is going to have these long-term effects.
But evidence would point that it is not just an occupational hazard, it's an inevitability for for many people, and we don't know what that number is.
Right now, the number is 23.6%, according to a 2018 study out of Florida.
Okay, so 1/4 of image bearers having brain damage is fine. What would it be? 30% where it's too far? 50% if it's too far? 75? Or does it have to be 100% of them? Like one guy makes it out without brain damage, and it's valid.
I would like to say it's higher in football.
Sure, but just because...
But we're not having the NFL podcast.
Yeah, just because it doesn't necessarily... Like football may be in question, but doesn't...
Well, if it has a higher rate, it should definitely be in question before the UFC, if that's the concern.
Hey, here's the thing. I enjoy watching football. I have a hard time with it for these very reasons. And I think if you want to win me over and challenge me on that, I am receptive to it. I'm up for having that conversation. But both of these things can be detrimental and diminishing shalom at the same time, right? Just because...
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
If you're saying if you're going to throw out UFC, you have to throw out football too. Well, then let's have the conversation if we throw out football.
Well, I'm saying there's a lot of things that we have to throw. We talked about ice cream.
Yeah.
Driving.
Yeah, but the purpose of driving is not to get in a car accident. I think what you have to ask is what is God's intended purpose for things? And I think God's intended purpose for human strength is productive, fruitful work and the protection of others. And UFC violates that. It violates it because it's taking the very abilities, the faculties that you would use toward productive work and doesn't serve another, but now is directed towards harming another. Furthermore, the what is happening in that moment can actually diminish a person's life to the degree that they can't do that fruitful work anymore. Like, one gauge of whether a sport is a worthy sport is, are you healthier after doing it? And you cannot say that the UFC folks are healthier long-term after doing it. Neither is football, granted.
Would you say basketball is?
Yeah.
You're healthier after an NBA career than before.
Yes.
Why?
Because your life is about doing cardiovascular exercise.
With high impact on ankles and knees and Achilles tendons and all of these things that get injured all the time. Fingers.
See, that is an occupational hazard. If the goal of basketball is to injure your knees and ankles, then I agree with you. Not a great sport.
Okay.
All right.
Will, I would love to ask you a question, Will.
Yeah.
Because Jim has made the case pretty strongly, and he got to go first, then you rebutted. My question for you is, how does UFC contribute to God's shalom? Specifically, what would you say? Like, how does this contribute to God's shalom?
Yeah, I don't think it should be singled out from other sports or competition. I think in all of those ways that you see strength stewarded. You see athleticism, training, all of these things stewarded well. I talked about the restraint in it, that it is not a free, but there is great restraint in it. That's one of the most beautiful things of God. He is all powerful, yet he restrains that power and engages with us and interacts with us in this way. We see it in Jesus, the one who spoke everything into being, restraining. And you see that the same in UFC. If even thinking through like the personal lives, like bringing up the domestic violence argument, like, man, these guys could like beat up anyone in any room that they're in, but you don't see that.
Wait, where is the restraint?
There's restraint in not doing.
And not doing what?
In which? In the ring or in the octagon or outside?
Anything. Because I never choke anybody and I never punch people in the face. So am I showing a greater degree of restraint than UFC fighters? Like, where is the restraint?
The restraint in a UFC match is in not just going wild, but abiding by the rules.
Yeah. In
stopping when the opponent taps.
Yeah.
In those things, you see, there are times where a ref is slow to check. So the most brutal aspect of the sport, right? Like, call it the ground and pound. When you're on top of somebody punching them, until the ref comes in, you see multiple instances where the guy who's on top, who's beating his opponent, is looking over at the ref like, dude, this guy's out. So if it was just this like bloodthirsty thing, why would they look at the ref?
So like literally everyone in the world who doesn't punch people in the face to the point that they're almost knocked out is showing more restraint than the UFC fighters.
I'm saying the person who has devoted their life to honing those skills, who in the heat of competition, their livelihood, right? It's not just like, oh, I want to win, but like, this is how my kids are fed. This is how my team is fed and their children. They pay their trainers, right? The UFC doesn't pay their trainers. That's on the fighter.
Yeah.
So if they win, that money is literally not just supporting their family, but the families of all of the closest people who are training them, like all of that.
That's true of the mafia. Like a lot of people supported by the mafia.
You are throwing a ton of false equivalencies out here, Mr. Pornographic Olympics.
Basketball with bullets.
Basketball with bullets. Give me a break.
I feel like it should be basketball with a bat. Yeah, that's probably more equivalent.
They are false equivalency.
Yes,
but I'm basing it on your reasoning, your moral reasoning. And if that is a legit moral reasoning that it supports a lot of families, then the mafia.
Well, I'm not saying you do a UFC because
they show restraint. They only kill like a couple of people, right? And only the ones who aren't loyal to them.
That's true. This is very true.
So
hey, it's the All of Life podcast, God's beauty as displayed by the mafia.
That's good. So I see Steven over in the corner, just like having an anxiety attack because we've gone too long. Like just literally panicking.
Oh man, guys, this is gonna be so good.
Yeah.
This takes me back 6 years to the diner. We never got to flesh this conversation out.
So we could go longer, but one thing we should say before we wrap up is the stakes of this conversation.
Stakes are high.
The stakes are high. So we decided we would throw it out to whoever in the church or whatever, and we'll we'll find some way for people to vote. I'm sure by this time it'll be in the show notes. And if Will won the debate, then I am going to do a few weeks of kickboxing classes.
Let's go.
And if I won the debate, Will is going to buy a nice brisket for me, and I'll smoke it for both of us, and we'll feast on the brisket together.
There you go.
That's what's at stake.
If you do kickboxing, are you guys going to fight? You guys going to do some MMA action?
Oh, man.
See who really wins?
Way.
No.
Yeah.
No way.
He'd get me in the kickboxing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, here. I think we should wrap up with kind of giving some, pointing out some things that we appreciate about the other's argument.
Yeah.
And here's one of the things I'll say. I think that the utility of the discipline it creates is very beneficial to people who are participating in martial arts in general, mixed martial arts. I think that there are many aspects of God's character that are put on display, including protection and preservation. I think that there are aspects of the human body, the potential that God put in the human body to do unique, athletic, productive acts that are being put on display, and it shows the brilliance of God's creation. And I do think that it's not as cut and dry as people wanting to do just savage acts of violence against one another, that there is a degree of discipline and restraint that the more you know and the more invested in it, in the craft, the more you can appreciate, which I probably can't see. I'm tempted to say what I don't concede, but that is like, I will say that, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. The most problematic thing that you bring up for me, for my side of the argument, is the concussions and the long-term effects of that. That's real. That's a very real thing and a consideration. I think also what it does inside of people. In some ways, in the competitors, you can see ways that it brings out some of the best. Incredible stories of guys, reaching out after a match and training together, and these lifelong friendships, and people finding positive life choices through the sport and things like that. However, we have to deal with what it does inside of us. It's probably not too far away from like even America's Funniest Home Videos. Why is it hilarious to watch old ladies slip on ice? Right? Like there is something in us
that's funny.
Dude, you can't ask me that, man. Of all the people at this table.
Yeah, good point.
But I think there is something in us that loves to see someone fail. And that's the ugliness that we all have to grapple with in it. And I think that those are two very, very valid points that we have to wrestle with.
Yeah, grapple with you.
Yeah, hey, I like how you were saying raising the stakes and we're doing brisket. So we got dad jokes on full display here.
That's right.
Guys, this has been good. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being on here. And thank you all for listening. Join us for our next podcast on the All of Life podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the All of Life podcast. To get more information on Redemption Church Tempe, you can download the Redemption Tempe app, or you can send an email to tempe@redemptionaz.com.